So yeah, so this session, Cooper and I are just going to have a bit of a conversation. We're both chairs, so we're both on the European Chairs Assembly. So we're going to talk about an ecologically engaged tree ratner, sort of from that perspective. So the first thing we want to do, though, is to introduce. We're going to introduce each other. I get to introduce a Cooper. So, if you don't know him, he is the chair of Newcastle and he's been involved there for 27 years. And it was just occurring to me earlier, this is why I haven't had much to do with a Cooper for a long time, because I've never been to Newcastle. That's what I realised. So I feel like I ought to make amends there. So, yeah, so he's a long standing connection with the northeast of England, and he also likes tea. He likes tea to the extent that he runs a vegan tea house, and he's quite proud of the fact it was the first vegan cafe in the northeast of England. So he's on the cutting edge there. He was ordained in 2000. His name means unshakable. And his path in terms of the environment hasn't been one of protesting so much as trying to work within the political system to change things. And he's also been concerned not just around environmental matters, but more general social issues too. So he was involved in politics in the late 1980s, and he said actually he went to talk to the Labour Party about climate change in the late 80s. He's not sure it had any effect, but he was doing that. So this is like 30 plus years ago, isn't it? He said that I was asking what his connection was to nature, and he said he had a very suburban childhood, but he was near the coast, so he's more of a seashore and rock pool kind of person than a forest person. Although I think that might have changed over the years a bit. And he mentioned he was very influenced by his geography teacher, who sounds like he was absolutely terrifying in terms of discipline, but was really passionate about the earth and was teaching his class about the theory, what was then the theory of climate change back in the 70s. So, and that's obviously really sparked something off in the Cooper, his love for the earth, which he has followed, well, ever since then, really. So very lovely to have a Cooper here today. Yeah.
Thank you, Maitra Devi, and it's a real pleasure to introduce you as well. Yeah, come to Newcastle sometime. I have been to Taraloka twice, which is quite unusual for a man, isn't it? I've done 2 retreats at Taraloka, so I do know where you're coming from. So Maitra Devi, Maitra Devi's name means love goddess. Though she was telling me that actually Devi, something like goddess or queen or angel, or interestingly, I thought bird, because Maitra Devi was a keen bird watcher from a very early age, from the age of about 5. Yeah, a very young age to sort of connect with nature in that way. And I couldn't help thinking of that earlier this afternoon, doing that buzzard, that really beautiful buzzard meditation, that in a way that comes from, I think, years of really watching birds. She studied zoology at university, and then spent some time in the cloud forest of Venezuela on an expedition, and it sounds like that had an effect on her and made her particularly aware of the fate of the cloud forests and rainforest disappearance in general. She's also worked for a wildlife trust, so nature was part of her work. She was a species protection officer, which I think is a beautiful job. to be the protector of a species that was in the Lake District. But then I think a bit like me, she sort of felt that actually change was needed on the level of hearts and minds, not just sort of working in the system. Good though that is, but yeah, some sort of deeper change was needed, which was again, she found Buddhism quite early, in her early 20s. She worked at Windhorse looking after the money for 20 years. Is that right? A long time. And of course now is at Tara Loka, where I know just from speaking to women here in Newcastle, you know, she touches a lot of people's lives. She's an important figure in a lot of people's lives. And in a way, you know, she's living communally, living a life of sharing, of simplicity, and is connecting with nature. And that really is Maitri Devi's approach, as we've heard. There's something about the richness of being in a particular place and connecting the Dharma with nature in that place, somewhere sort of local and specific. And I think we're really seeing that in these beautiful nature reflections. And just one final thing, I've also noticed Maitri Devi's got a very cool head, and that really, in a moment, we'll be talking about the European Chairs Assembly and how we sort of got this recognised as a priority. But actually, that was in no small part down to Maitri Devi's kind of coolness and diplomacy, which sort of got that through. So yeah, a woman of many qualities, Maitri Devi.
Thanks, Akupa. That's a really lovely introduction. Yeah. So we're going to have a little chat just around the strategic priority that the European Chairs Assembly agreed. So yeah, the European Chairs Assembly, this is all of the chairs of urban centres and retreat centres throughout mainland Europe and England. Well, in the old days, we used to literally come together, and certainly back in January 2020, we came together. We meet twice a year, and what we were doing back in January 2020 was looking at what strategic priorities, what are the priorities as far as all the chairs of centres. So this is looking at the movement strand of Triratna. What's the priorities that we need to be attending to and even resourcing? So historically, some of the priorities have been things like increasing the number of young people coming into Triratna, also putting resources into safeguarding to make sure that things go well for people coming along to centres. They've been also looking at the areas of diversity. And what we wanted to get on into this list of strategic priorities, well, certainly I did, and I know Akupa did, was to get something about the environment. And this was on the back of, I think it was 2019, wasn't it? It was this, well, there was the IPCC report with, just these dire warnings. I think that was the end of 2018. And then there was, what I almost found more distressing was the biodiversity report that came out in 2019, just talking about, how many species were on the edge of extinction. So it was on the, pre-pandemic, but on the back of that. And in a way, what the strategic priorities are supposed to do are reflect what's really alive and what's really of concern to Triratna. So we managed to, well, actually, I don't think it was that difficult. I think I think it's been a bit of a push, maybe over decades, but there was basically a lot of support from the chairs. We had a very fulsome discussion, and there's a lot of support from all of the chairs about recognising that we need to, Triratna as a movement needs to find a way to engage with ecological issues. It's no good just sort of having it off on the periphery. It's too crucial and too central to everybody's minds at the moment. And people coming along to centres, that is one of the things they want to know about. You know, what does Buddhism have to say around this? So that's what we agreed. And I just want to say, I'm going to hand over to Cooper in a little bit just to talk about the priority a bit more. But what I want to say is, by setting a strategic priority, it doesn't mean, and Triratna is just so, if you're familiar with it at all, it's so anarchic, and it does not mean that there's any sort of authority giving weight to us all having to think the same way at all about ecological or any other issues. It's not some sort of top-down stamp of approval. In a way, I think it's more a mandate for us to explore and discuss and experiment in this area and try and find what works, rather than any sort of approval for a particular approach. So, for example, this conference, which I'm so pleased is happening, and it's just, I haven't done anything in relation to it, but I know a lot of people who work incredibly hard behind the scenes, but it's got support from the ECA. It got support from the ECA, which means it could be hosted by the Buddhist Centre Online. So it's sort of, so in a way, so it's not as though the ECA is saying we agree with everything being said. It's more like we agree with the principle of coming together and discussing the issues and wanting to support that. Yeah, so that's what we managed to agree back in January 2020, and then we went into a pandemic. Yeah, so it's been interesting. But I'm just going to ask Cooper to talk a little bit more about the wording, because we had the wording of the priority was looking at dharmic responses to social and ecological issues. So Cooper's going to say a little bit about that. Yeah.
Yeah, so that was the wording, a dharmic response. And it did include, well, as you say, Maitreya Devi, social and ecological issues. But as a group, we sort of decided to start off with the ecological issues, because that's where the energy was at the time. So it really begs the question then, well, what do we mean by a dharmic response? I thought Shanti Garba covered it earlier on in a way when he described the climate and ecological emergency as as a crisis of greed, hatred, and ignorance. So that's one aspect of a dharmic response. And well, the response obviously then comes from the path, so it will be founded on Buddhist ethics. It will arise from an actual practice of meditation, and in a way will be geared towards a sort of deeply seeing in terms of sort of wisdom. So I suppose as a working group, the working group of chairs got together to sort of think about this. And we just thought, well, what would that look like? You know, what would it look like for a Triratna that is sort of more deeply responding to social and ecological issues? First of all, acknowledging that there's already a lot going on, you know, that people do. We're not in a bubble. But what would it look like for us to sort of go deeper with that? Because, you know, maybe given that, you know, we all find our own path, we all find our own role, then you don't know, you know, the response of Triratna will be the sum total of what we all do, what we do individually, plus what we do collectively and what we're inspired to do and moved to do and feel able to do. So, that sort of top-down approach wouldn't be appropriate. But we can dream, we can try and envision what it would look like, and then perhaps that helps bring it into being. For some people in Triratna, it might be that they take a good look at the state of the world, at the ecological crisis, and it just inspires them to do what they're doing already. Maybe not explicitly mentioning climate change, but it just encourages them to deepen their practice, to communicate, to build Sangha. So, for some people it might be that. For some people it might be, street protest. For others it might be connection with nature and so on. But I think the one thing that I would say is to connect. That's the point, is connecting our practice individually and our coming together as sanghas. Just making the connection in terms of Dharma teaching, in terms of ethics, and also really connecting with nature. We'll be coming back to that later. And of course, as I said, there's already a kind of real wealth of things happening around nature. It's something that's sort of arisen from Triratna. Buddha Field being perhaps the jewel in the crown, but also, Sankaravancha's land, Eco-Dharma, what retreat centres are doing with their land, and what other individuals might be doing as well. So I think the first thing is to sort of affirm and celebrate what people are already doing and the connections that we're already making.
So I just want to follow on from that with so the affirming of what we've already been doing, but also there's been quite a lot happening in the last 20 months since this strategic priority got agreed. And interestingly, I thought it had got completely clobbered by the pandemic. It felt like we just got something agreed, and then everything got diverted to something else. But it's been interesting, hasn't it? I wonder whether that's actually the case. So one of the first things I got on my list of what's happened, and these aren't things necessarily initiated at all by the ECA, but in a way have happened in a sort of maybe just in the sense of a general atmosphere of Triratna over the last year and a half. So the Triratna Earth Sangha started gatherings. So this is people meeting up online, both by Zoom and on the Slack channel. And actually that would not have happened without the pandemic and us all getting used to that sort of technology. So what's happened is small numbers of people who are quite isolated have now been able to meet and connect, across time zones, across countries. And so the Triratna Earth Sangha obviously is like the moving force behind this conference, which is fantastic. The whole lead up to COP26 has still been in place despite the pandemic. So we've had Shanti Garba doing his damnedest, and Windhorse Pubs to get his book out in time for that, and doing it. And one of the things that we were discussing at the Chairs Assembly was we'd like to see more, as Akuba mentioned, teaching at centres that looks at the environment more explicitly. And Shanti Garba immediately ran with that and has come up with an 8-week course, which he's been trialling online. Again, an interesting sort of way to be able to test that out on people. So that's also available. We had an Earth Meditation Day back in April, again allowing people from all over the world to connect in. We've revised the Sustainable Centres scheme, so that's been going for a long time, and that's Amlakitu's something he's been very, very active in, and so that's now slightly upgraded to try and have centres become carbon neutral. I'm not aware that there's been much uptake of that, mainly because most of the centres have been physically shut. But I'm hoping, especially as more local groups get going, that might be something that could be pushed along a little bit. Certainly something I'd love to see at Tara Loka is us. We are moving towards carbon neutral, but I'd like us to get there. Yeah. And there's been a whole flourishing of talks and teachings as well, in different contexts, whether it's at the Buddhafield Festival or various retreats. And of course, this whole conference has emerged. So there's actually been quite a lot of new things, and this is on top of what Akupa was saying about that there's actually lots that's been happening anyway. That we can affirm, the people have still been involved in exile protests and other sort of actions. Buddhafield, Eco-Dharma, all those places have been going for a long time. Yeah, so that's something that's what's been happening recently. What I want to do, though, is to maybe ask Akupa to talk a little bit, because in a way what we're interested in is what might be possible, what sort of things might be possible. In a way, I suppose we can only talk about what would we like to see, what are our particular pet things. So Akupa, I know, has particular things he'd like to see, so maybe you could say a little bit more about what else could be happening. Yeah.
So, yeah, I suppose one of the ideas, again, building on the sort of culture created by Buddhafield and others, is to really have a sense of Triratna turning to the land and turning to a very kind of immediate experience of practice within nature. In a way, this would be part of a kind of a broad approach to climate change. There's the approach of people holding the stop sign, to use that phraseology, but also sort of behind that and supporting all of that underneath it, kind of creating a foundation of a kind of deep connection with nature. So, a lot of Triratna is, we tend to be quite urban. A lot of Triratna is based around urban centres, and, we go on retreat, and no doubt we go to the countryside and so on. But could there be a bit of a shift in that direction? So one idea that's come up is that each centre might actually have its own bit of land, not as a retreat centre in the way we think of them, but just somewhere that the local Sangha could go, not just on a sort of once or twice a year, but on a weekly basis or 2 weekly or something like that. Land where centres could come together to plant trees, to grow food, to create sacred spaces, sacred groves. It would very much depend on what the local Sangha wanted and what the land was appropriate for. And in a way, the purpose of that would be to really explore from a very hands-on, immersed sort of way, to sort of reimagine our connection with nature. It also occurred to me, we've been talking about grief in relation to the natural world, and there's something, certainly my experience is that a sort of way of holding that is actually to immerse oneself in nature, and to really be open to the sort of beingness, as it were, of I say nature, but in a way, well, trees, forests, rivers, the ocean, and so on. And that, it feels quite a very important part, as well as reaching out to each other, that we actually reach out to the non-human beings as well. So perhaps these sort of spaces could be places of just sort of kind of healing with nature, coming into the love of nature. And it also, another sort of reason for kind of strengthening our connection with land is actually resilience. It does seem that even if COP26 is successful, we're already locked into the system. There's a certain amount of kind of disruption is going to happen. It does look like we're headed for tough times. So really, as Taratna, we need to be there and ready for what that's going to mean in terms of suffering for people. And it also means that we need to sort of think about our resilience as a community, in order to to practice the Dharma and keep it available for whoever's living through those times and for generations to come. So it seems that we really need to think about that. And it seems that the two ingredients, as well as the Dharma, the ingredients of keeping the Dharma alive are community, Sangha. But it also feels to me instinctively that a connection with land is going to be really important from a sort of practical point of view, but also just from somewhere to be rooted amidst what could be quite troubled times. So that's a bit of a vision, as you say, Maitreya Devi. This isn't a kind of grand top-down sort of plan. And actually, just already having just sort of talked about this idea in different places, and find that other people are thinking along similar lines, and so on. It's perhaps just sort of, perhaps it's enough just to sort of put the idea out there into the sort of Taratna culture, and then see what comes of it. But what might come from it in the end is a sort of like a kind of jeweled network of sacred nature places, natural places, across wherever Taratna is. And I quite like that idea that you could actually sort of do a pilgrim from one site to another. Yeah. So that's just one. That's a very particular idea, and part of that, I suppose, is the practice of actually healing nature through tree planting and rewilding. In Newcastle, we've had a bit of a tree planting group, just joining in other schemes, not our own, sort of on our own land or anything, but it's a really lovely thing to do. It's just to actually get out and get your hands dirty and put some trees into the soil. Really, really lovely, enriching thing to do. And, potentially a really valuable contribution to the kind of carbon cycle as well in the long term. So, again, that's something we could add into the sort of mix of responses. This is one of the things we do as Taratna is we plant trees, or we allow land to rewild naturally. Whatever's appropriate for the land concerned. So there you go. That's one direction that we move in.
I feel cheered just hearing that already, even though I've heard it before. I think yes. Partly my personal response. I suppose I'm just aware that historically in Triratna we've talked quite a lot about the arts and Dharma, and the way that the arts will express in Western sort of culture, the sort of Dharmic truths that we've inherited. And I suppose what I'm thinking is actually we need to make that connection with our the local natural world around us, with the sort of the spirits of the place. I know there's been quite a bit of talk about animism over the last day of the conference, and I'm right in there with that. But that making that connection, in a way, it's like, what does the Dharma ground into, if not this specific place, this particular patch of ground that we stand on and that we meditate on? And I think it's there's a certain sort of tradition or sort of aspect of Buddhism where, in a way, it's the world departing sort of Buddhism. It's the one that leaves the world behind, and there's another strand of Buddhism that goes into the world more. And I think for me, it's very much that second one that I'm interested in, and that sense of not importing something sacred into a mundane and non-sacred or secular world, but rather turning round and noticing how extraordinary this land is and its sacred nature, and in a way allowing that to be seen. It's certainly something I feel quite enthusiastic about at Taraloka. We've just created this new sort of landscaped area, Sky Garden. But what it is it's an external shrine room. So it's not that you practice in the shrine room and then you go out into a nice garden. It's more that it's a sacred space that you practice in out there. And I think there's some sort of meeting of Dharma with land that feels really important to me, that I'd love to see explored in all sorts of ways, whether it's those sacred growths that Akupa's talking about, or whether it's to do with the way we flavour our Dharma teaching so that it's much more embedded in what's local. And personally, I know we have got the Celtic puja, but I just love our liturgy to be far more local in a way, maybe less lotuses and more water lilies. I don't know. I know, having been to Estonia, that's something they're very keen on. In a way, that there's a sort of an interesting creative tension to be held between the commonality where we all feel we connect, no matter where we are in the world, and also this love, this passionate love of the specific and the local. So that's something I feel very keen on, and maybe we might talk about this a bit more. But just other things that, like on a totally different level, that I'm aware of is, it would also be great. We've got an 8-week course going. It would be great. I'd love to see a Mitra study module. I'm not quite sure how we get about pushing that forward, but that's something I'd like to see. Embedding these things more centrally in Triratna. I'm also aware that, I have had conversations, I'm not sure where it's got quite, but in terms of trying to find funding for, let's say, a centre wants to become more sustainable, but they need to pay out a certain amount to get, an expensive and ecological heating system or whatever it is. So some way where we can fund, where we can provide grants. And I think that's very possible. Somewhere like the Windhorse Trust could do that. So those are sorts of quite practical things as well that we could be doing, as well as this celebrating the land. And I think for myself, there's also this sense of the excitement of in a way, we're being asked in unprecedented times. We're being asked to really dig deep in our practice and come up with unprecedented ways of practicing the Dharma. And in a way, that is going to keep the movement alive. We are not going to solidify and fossilize if we are asked to dig deep in that way. And I think pushing on the boundaries of what we understand metta to be, of what we understand living beings to be, pushing on the boundaries of our assumptions about our own inherent superiority over other species, pushing on the boundaries of our assumptions about this hard line between what's alive and what's not alive. I think these sorts of things could really bring about a flourishing both of the Dharma, but also of us in relation to, the world in its fullness, a flourishing world, flourishing Buddhism in a flourishing world. Yeah. So I don't know if you want to say anything more about that, Akupa.
Yeah, I'd love to say quite a lot more. I mean, I do think this is, of what we have to offer the world, what we as a group of practicing Buddhists have to offer the world at this time. This reimagining of who and what we are in relation to the world not as a resource, but as a shared home with these other beings who are conscious of really sort of meeting the aliveness of the world. And, I think a really rich and joyful way of living can come from that. And I do think it's, there's a sort of transformative power in that as well, especially, if we don't just do it individually, but in a way we build a culture more and more around that. Yes to animism. The last couple of years, maybe under the influence of lockdown, I just seem to have gone full tilt animist. So I'm right behind that. It occurred to me, one of the things that I'd quite like to see. You know how in Triratna we talk about the 6 emphases, often in describing ourselves as Triratna. We say, I can't remember all 6 of them, I think, that we're ecumenical in our approach, we're kind of united order, emphasis on workers' practice, on spiritual friendship, and so on. What I'd really like to see is a 7th emphasis. So the whole thing of nature being regarded as a 7th emphasis, practice within nature and connection, nature connection, you could say, as the 7th emphasis of Triratna. Wouldn't that be great? Again, this isn't something that can be sort of decided from above. It's more, I'd really love it if, in sort of 10 or 20 years' time, it just becomes obvious that it's obvious that we do have that as one of our emphases, along with all the others. Because it's what the world needs, it's just really what we need, and it's what the world needs. And also just what you were saying about, not importing sacredness, but in a way finding it for ourselves again in our own culture, through that actual connection and real sort of openness to nature. Just finding our own sense of the sacred, of myth and story, and so on. It feels like that's what we need to offer, really.
And it strikes me there's a lot of joy in that. And I know there's a lot of reasons to be scared and for grief, but there's a lot of joy in that. And I suppose it's something that I think about is we need to just want so much less than we do. And the way we'll want so much less is to, to be delighted by what we do have. In a way, you need a quantum of joy to support contentment, don't you? And I do think that's something that Buddhism and Triratna could certainly bring more of into the world. Yeah, a quantum of joy.
Good. Sounds good.
So we've got about 9 minutes or something like that. So Akupa and I, we probably said most of what we wanted to say. So in a way, we're just going to open it up and see if anybody's got any questions or comments. You could put them in the chat, or if there's not much activity, you could just unmute yourself and say something. Maybe we'll try the chat first and just see. Yes, someone in the chat's mentioned this. Yes, I also noticed Vajradarshini's her little comment on placefulness. Yeah, I can't remember the name of the woman whose work she was drawing on, but I was just reading that earlier and thinking, yes, that sort of sense of that deep, intimate connection with place, that being grounded and intimately knowing something is, yeah, is so important in a rather dislocated age, in a somewhat abstracted and alienated and disconnected age, isn't it?
And it's building on what's there. Like you, I was just in Estonia. I know you were there, I think, maybe last year. So hello, Herdis, and anyone else that's there from Estonia. But again, there's already such a sort of strong sort of connection, particularly with the forest in that place, and such a sort of rich thing to sort of foundation to kind of build on, really. So it's kind of all of us finding our own connections with our own particular places, but also something kind of collective will arise from that in our sort of culture, which goes across places, doesn't it?
Yeah. Hello, Akupa and Mike.
So we've got a question.
Oh, hello, both of you. Hello.
From Nyanakar as well.
Hello, Nyanakar.
Yeah. So we had a question just from Christine, which is, what are the first or next steps for this movement? I mean, that makes it sound like we've got one of those roadmaps like the government's got to get out of the pandemic, doesn't it? I mean, maybe Akupa's got some sort of response to this. What are the first or next steps? In a way, it feels to me like there's a bit of a blossoming of things that are happening, which I think is coming out of sort of partly the right time and the right place and a commitment on people. So it doesn't strike me, there's no one sort of ordering this or directing it. I suspect the first and next steps are, in a way, wherever people's enthusiasm and energy happens to coincide, with other people's. There's these sort of collectives coming together. And in a way, I think this conference could be quite pivotal. I think we're starting to see each other. I think we're giving each other ideas. And I think, who knows what could come out of this. I'm pretty sure something's going to come out of this without knowing what it is. But that sense of the importance of being able to come together and, in a way, hear ourselves articulating our enthusiasm and our inspiration. It seems to me like the way to keep things moving. Yeah. I don't know if you've got something to say, Akupa.
Well, I think one particular thing I'd like to do is, in terms of sort of affirming and celebrating what's already happening, is to do with just people who practice with and on the land, and maybe just having a way, perhaps a website that or even just making a kind of video in which you interview people who are just practicing with the land. So, you know, there's a lot of experience out there. So it's just something about bringing it together and sort of celebrating it, affirming it, and sort of getting it out there. You know, that seems like one next step, which if I had infinite time, I'd be giving a lot more time to. Yeah.
I'm just muting myself. I'm just also looking at another question. Barbara's sort of saying, in the meantime, could every Tree Ratner retreat centre offer their space for a dedicated retreat on climate, ecological matters, active hope, resilience building? Question mark. So this is kind of interesting for me as a chair of a retreat centre, because it's not my personal direct experience, but this is a sort of like what I've inherited, is a sense of when we've in the past put on retreats that are more dedicated to environmental issues, people don't come. In a way, people don't want to come on retreat for those things. They want to come on other sorts of retreats. Now, I'm not always entirely sure why that is. I wonder whether there's a sense of it'll be a very sort of angsty and grueling sort of retreat, and actually people don't want that. I'm not sure. For myself, I haven't therefore been trying to do those sorts of retreats at Tara Loka, but what I have been trying to do is a bit more stealth nature love. So I just keep banging on about getting people to go out and hug trees and connect with nature and just really love it. But it might be that the times have changed and that people do want to come on these retreats. I don't know. So I'm not quite sure how to get a measure for that, but it's an interesting question. I don't think we can just assume that things are carrying on the same way. So I'm just trying to keep up with the chat. Yeah.
I do think there's something in that stealth approach, as it were, because, you know, we don't need, in a way, to be constantly referring to climate change, but it can just sort of percolate what we do anyway. And I think, you know, if we're going to sort of speak to the kind of body of Triratna, the kind of people who wouldn't come on this weekend, for example, then probably, you know, retreats applies to retreats, but also just, you know, however we communicate the Dharma. There's a real value in just infusing that with a kind of ecological connection. Well, you know, making that connection, basically, just sort of dropping it in. So, you know, changing the way we do every retreat, not just special retreats, or, you know, every Sangha night at a centre or something. Yeah. Seems quite to have both, in a way, both things that are definitely about ecology and climate change and so on, but also just trying to change what the sort of bulk of what we do.
Yeah, I think that's probably my tendency more as well. So I'm just trying to keep up with these questions. So Sangasi has been leading Buddhism and deep ecology retreats and days at the LBC for a few years, and has had very good take up. So that's really good to hear. Yeah, so maybe I think it's sort of like the specific dedicated and also the broad brush sort of stealth approach, probably both. I just think we need to do everything. You know, it's like, if you want to do it, have a go, see what happens. You know, this sense of there isn't a single solution to the predicament we're in, and actually everybody doing something, a whole wide range of things, but also in a cooperative way, not in a sort of individualistic way. I think we'll start to learn what's effective. Yeah, I'm just aware of the time, and we probably need to wrap up now. Sorry, we haven't really managed to do justice to everything in the chat, but really appreciate your comments. Yes, and Herdis is rejoicing that Kupa's retreat in Estonia was a good example of how to relate with nature and Dharma. Yeah. Yeah, if you want a very pagan country to go to, try Estonia. It's great. So I think we'll finish there. Thank you very much for joining us for this last hour. I think the next thing is on, there's something, I don't know title, but it's on Buddhist engagement with Extinction Rebellion, isn't it? Something like that. So that's at 5:30. So do stay on for that. I think it's going to be really interesting. Yeah, thank you again.
Thank you, Maitra Devi.